Welcome to American Government, the Global Pandemic Online Edition. I'm your instructor for this course, Mr. Lucas. So in most years on the first day, I go over the syllabus, and for the first week, we play the cheesy get to know you games, but fear not, introverts. With everything online this year, that's not gonna happen. Plus, I'm not a big fan of it myself. So I'll start this video going over just a little bit about myself. I graduated from Watkins Memorial High School, and when I was there, I did things like musical theater. I was actually the Beast my senior year in Beauty and the Beast. I also was in the vocal ensemble, and I did jazz band as well. I went to Bowling Green State University, and there I also did a cappella groups. I was in a few music clubs and things like that. And I'm currently working on my master's in political science from American Public University. Now, my family is all from the rural hills of Southwest West Virginia. So you may hear me from time to time say things a little bit oddly or with an accent. Perfectly fine to make fun of me. I won't be able to hear you. My dad was in the Air Force during the Gulf War, and he programmed satellites at an Air Force base out in Colorado Springs, which is where I was born, and explains why I'm a big Denver Broncos fan. I've been married for almost 2 years to my beautiful wife, Audrey, who is also a teacher. She actually just started teaching 4th grade math and social studies at Etna Elementary this year. My hobbies include watching and playing sports. I particularly love NASCAR and football. Fun fact, I actually used to race against current IndyCar driver Zach Veach when we race go-karts at Circleville Raceway Park. I've also got hillbilly in my blood, so I love the outdoors and I really enjoy fishing in my spare time. I also enjoy researching my family history on Ancestry.com and finding out stuff about my family's past. I also love to read books. I love to play Xbox, even though it's been out for 4 or 5 years. My favorite game is still Battlefield 1. With the 3 people that still play on a server. And I also love Minecraft, and I got my wife addicted to it this past spring. And probably my favorite thing of all is to play music. In college, I started a folk bluegrass band with some of my buddies, and in more recent years, I've been playing all over the state year-round, except for obviously this year. I play guitar, mandolin, banjo, dobro, steel guitar, and I like to think that I can sing. I've played on a few professional records, and my claim to fame is opening for country music star Tyler Childers before he hit it big back in 2015. Oh, did I mention my wife sings too? We also perform together in our church's worship band on the weekends. Yeah, you better believe when I proposed, I went full Johnny Cash style, in the middle of a show. So that's enough about me. I'm sure you're wondering what my class is gonna look like this year. Quite frankly, so am I.
Yes, get over there!
So first things first, this class is gonna be a little bit different than some of your other social studies classes like history. With government, we're studying a structure and a system that's still currently in place right now. So you're gonna notice we have more of an emphasis in this class on current events and what's currently going on in the world than maybe necessarily looking back in the past. That doesn't mean we'll never talk about history, especially at the beginning of the year we will, but that won't be the main emphasis. And so you might be wondering what kinds of things we're gonna learn in this class this year. In government class, we learn all about the structure of our government and how it works. We learn about the Constitution, what power does President Trump actually have? What is this thing you hear about in the news called Congress? We learn about the Bill of Rights and what rights you as an individual have. We learn about elections, registering to vote. We learn why your parents get really angry every April 15th, and probably you too here soon. We learn about the judicial system and how it works. We also learn how a bill becomes a law.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
If you don't know that song yet by heart, you will. We also learn about state and local government and who has the power to do what, which is especially relevant during a global pandemic. And at the end of the year, we'll learn a little bit about economics and international relations. Now, in a typical year, I try to make my class as hands-on as possible. I know you all can simply Google search a constitutional amendment, a law, or a procedure if you really need it someday. But what I can offer you that the internet can't is experience. I love to do simulations. Typically in the fall, we have a school-wide congressional simulation I put on with Mrs. Griffin's government classes. I mean, we go all out for this thing. We have presidential elections where students run under a fictitious party and they choose their vice presidential running mate. We have presidential debates and then a legit election where every junior in the school votes just like you would in a real election. I mean, we even check your photo IDs when you come into class and we set up little voting booths. After the election, everyone else then becomes either a representative in the House of Representatives or senator in the Senate. There you get to create laws, you can debate them and vote on them, and just about every year, there's at least one class that decides to impeach and remove their president. Oh yeah, and there's also a media where students run their own media outlet. They interview politicians, and yes, they can write slam pieces and fake news. It's a lot of fun. Not to mention, Mrs. Griffin and I like to throw wrenches into the simulation to see how y'all deal with different scenarios. Oddly enough, last November, we created scenarios where TikTok was a national security threat and there was a dangerous virus that came out of China. I also do mock trials every year where there's a criminal case. Some of the class serve as witnesses to share their testimony, while some of the class argue the case as the prosecution and defense attorneys, while everyone else gets to be a juror and ultimately decide the case if the person's guilty or not guilty. Lastly, we do an international relations simulation called Guns or Butter, where the class is split into 5 different fictitious countries of varying power. You have to build up wealth by striking alliances and trade deals with other nations, and then you have to choose whether to invest that wealth into health, education, welfare, food, industry, or if you'll invest it into weapons. Then you can choose to attack other nations and steal their resources. But yeah, did I mention there's nukes you can build too? And you can use them. And of course, you can imagine what typically happens when a bunch of teenagers acquire nuclear weapons. This was a live shot from a couple years ago. Now, if CTEC does decide to permit extracurricular activities, I was supposed to head a new club called the Civic Simulation Club this year, which would do some of those simulations and other ones, such as Model United Nations, for students that want to go a step further and participate after school with others who really enjoy those simulations and those types of things. So since I'll be unable to do any of that this fall, I'm hoping we can do it all in the spring. For the fall, I'm going to have to change things up from how I would normally do them. My hope is that the fall and winter will be centered around learning content, and the spring can be dedicated to practicing the content in those real-life simulations. So here's my plan. On Mondays, I will post a video lecture going over not just the content, but also your assignments for the week. I'll use something called Edpuzzle for all videos. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it already, but if not, it's a platform where you watch a video and answer questions that I've implanted in the video. Now, as annoying as it may get, it helps me hold students accountable to make sure that you're watching and paying attention to things. Otherwise, it's a waste of my time. Now, my lecture video will likely be coupled with another video that goes over the content in some way. I'm a big believer in allowing you guys to receive the content from multiple sources. Some of you may not like my teaching style, and you might learn better learning from someone else, and I want to make sure you can. If nothing else, it at least re-emphasizes what you learned in my video. Both Edpuzzle video assignments will usually be due on Wednesdays. I think one of the greatest things I can help teach you all is to question and learn how to challenge ideas while having civil discourse. That's a fancy way of saying, not this. I think those skills are practiced best the way that you'll actually use them in real life, through talking and writing. So on Monday, I will present a critical thinking question of the week, CTQ for short. These questions won't have simple yes or no answers. It's not going to be something like, when was the Constitution ratified, or how was it ratified? It'll be more like, is democracy really the best system of government? Why or why not? You'll have to justify your responses using not just what you learned in class, but also other outside resources and maybe resources you choose. You'll be able to respond to that critical thinking question in one of 2 ways. First, and I think this is the preferred method, you can use something called Flipgrid to take a video of yourself responding to the question. So instead of typing up a big long essay, you can simply take a video of yourself answering my question, and then we can talk back and forth via the video. If you're not a fan of showing your face, don't worry, there's an audio feature on Flipgrid where you can actually create slides or doodle over a whiteboard and then just simply talk over it. Or if you choose or are unable to use Flipgrid, you can write your response on a Google Doc that I provide to you. Speaking of opinions, rest assured you will rarely, if ever, hear my own opinion. Parents, if you're watching this video and you're worried about your kid being indoctrinated by a left-wing college graduate or a fanatic Trump supporter, don't worry. Even in an election year, it's not my place to share my personal opinion and treat it like fact. I try to remain as unbiased as I possibly can to fairly present all the arguments from multiple sides of an issue. I remember being a student in classes where I was afraid to raise my hand and participate because I was terrified of offering up an opinion that I knew was contrary to the teacher's political leanings. If you don't believe me, here's a little bit of empirical evidence. At the end of every year, I give out a survey to students where they can choose what they think my political ideology is. Here were the results from last year. As you can see, an even number of students thought I was Republican and Democrat, while the largest portion thought I was independent. Some thought I was fascist or communist, but I'm guessing those were students still disgruntled over the open-ended quizzes on Fridays. Don't worry, those won't be a thing this year. So anyway, your response to the CTQ will typically be due on Thursday night. This gives me Friday and the weekend to provide feedback, and it gives you some time to look over it and respond to the feedback. So ultimately, a typical week in my class usually has 2 ed puzzles, followed by some reading and then a CTQ either on Flipgrid or you can write it. Sometimes I'll throw in maybe a GIM kit to play throughout the week as well. We might even do a competition where there's a prize at the end. We'll see. Now, of course, all of that is subject to change. If you've learned anything through the pandemic, it's that usually things are pretty flexible right now. As for late work, if you turn something in late, you can expect to receive 5 points off of that assignment, which at first you may be like, hey, that's not a lot. That's not too bad. Well, keep in mind, my assignments throughout the first 9 weeks probably won't exceed any more than 25 to 30 points for something. So typically that's a letter grade or more depending on the assignment. Now this is separate from the fact that doing your assignments also counts towards your attendance. So if you don't do your assignments, it counts against you attendance wise. Moral of the story? Just turn stuff in on time. You might be wondering, hey, Mr. Lucas, what happens if I'm working on my computer and then suddenly this happens?
Christ, that was no repress valve.
Maybe it's in quad
We've
C.
got a computer
I'm
restart.
gonna reconfigure the RCS.
We've got a
Where
ping
these things
light.
fire doesn't make any sense.
We got multiple caution and warning, Houston.
You have to let me know before the due date. If you let me know after it's due, that's not gonna do you any good. I'm not gonna give you an extension. But if you let me know before the due date, I can grant you an extension on that particular assignment. Now, if you think that seems unfair, there's one easy way to avoid all of this. You should have plenty of time to get your assignments done throughout the week. Don't wait until the last minute. Don't procrastinate. Speaking of assignments, let's talk about your first one. This week, I would love to get to know you. Your first assignment is to tell me about yourself using Flipgrid. Now in Google Classroom this week, you're going to see some tutorials on how to use some of the technology that I plan on using throughout this first 9 weeks, Flipgrid included. So if you're curious how to use it, just make sure you watch the tutorial. There's no minimum or maximum amount of time it has to be, but I want you to play around with Flipgrid and get used to it. If you can't do that, I'll have alternative instructions for you to do so I can get to know you without Flipgrid. You can tell me anything you'd like, your hobbies and interests, what program you're in, what you're most looking forward to at CTech, what you're most nervous about, anything. You can even ask me questions about my class if you'd like. Lastly, if you would like, feel free to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Mr_Lucas29. I do post about current events there, a little behind the scenes of my life, and from time to time I'll go live to answer questions and talk about a presidential debate, the State of the Union address, or even to hold a last-minute study session before a test. Now, if you do decide to follow me on social media, know this: I do not check my direct messages on Instagram or Twitter. I do not check my DMs at all. So if you try to direct message me and I don't answer, don't take it personal. If you need to contact me, email me or send me a message on Google Classroom. If you want to talk one-on-one, we can schedule a Google Meet session where we can talk one-on-one over the computer. If you have any questions about anything at all, my email is jlucas@c-tech.edu. Thanks for watching this welcome video. I look forward to meeting you all this year, and I hope we have an awesome year.